Knowing your customer, I think that is a highly underestimated part of your daily trade compliance work. It's not only an essential part of your due diligence process, but is also an important aspect of your overall trade compliance program. For example, knowing your customer or knowing your supplier can be a really important part of your risk mitigation process. For example, if you know your customer or you know your supplier, then you also know what level of risk it means to do businesses with that party. For example, if they have a weaker or a stronger internal compliance program, then you know how to adjust your compliance efforts when doing businesses with that party. But as usual, I'm not the one to do all the talking. So in this episode of the Trade Compliance Talks, the heavy lifting is going to be done by Mr. Phillip Cedoz. He will take you down all the rabbit holes and the nitty-gritty of the knowing your customer process. So grab yourself a mug of your favorite brew and enjoy this Trade Compliance Talks with Phillip Cedoz on the topic knowing your customer. So hello everyone and welcome to this Trade Compliance Talk with no one less than Phillip Cedoz, and we're going to talk about knowing your customer out of a trade compliance perspective. So welcome Phillip, and thank you for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Anders. It's great to be here. It's just to let everyone know that the thoughts and views I express here are mine, not my company's. Little disclaimer.
Always.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, great. I'm sure that everyone is as excited as I am to hear your thoughts on this topic. So I think this is going to be really awesome. So please give a short introduction to yourself.
Yeah, my name is Phil Cedoz. I am Vice President of Trade at Contact Telecommunications, where we make satellite and communications equipment meant to connect people. I spent about 10 years at BAE Systems, working alongside you on the US side.
Yes.
And several years at a microelectronics manufacturing company. So I've been doing this for quite a while and been building programs here recently.
That's nice. And I'm taking the most important questions first. So how the heck darn did you end up in trade compliance, Phillip?
NASA wasn't accepting applicants for being an astronaut anymore. I had to think of plan B, and I was fortunate enough to have a connection to a lovely person who worked at BAE, and they asked me if I was I was in a different, but semi-connected legal compliance kind of position, and they were curious, and they asked if I was looking for something else, and I said I was, and she got me to interview with a wonderful group of people at BAE, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yes, in the history books, and it's a great history. So moving on to the topic of this talk, knowing your customer, could you explain a little, a brief overview of the importance of knowing your customer out of a trade compliance perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the two pieces of main information you need as an exporter or as a business to be able to operate. You have to know your product. You have to know who you're selling it to, and that's knowing your customer. That customer can also be an internal customer. It's basically anyone that you need to know, but it sets the stage for the other portion of the regulations that are designed to prohibit end use or proliferation concerns. It's the other half of the equation that you need to know. And it not only furthers trade compliance, but as a business, knowing your customer, who they serve, what products they manufacture, where they use your products is vital to being able to become a better supplier, a better vendor, a better customer of theirs.
And if you could give an example of the know your customer process, how to provide an overview, including customer identification, verification, and risk assessment.
Yeah. So most common way that your customer is an end use statement that you ask them to complete. If you're in a type of business that sells semi-controlled, anything controlled good, that's a four folks fill out, right? Tells you who they are, tells you what kind of end user they are. Another very important way that you can find out who your customers are or end users is through your sales or customer service department, who they're the ones who have the customer facing relationships. They're the ones who would be able to tell you exactly what they do, right? Who this customer is, what products they're buying, why they're buying them, especially if you're in a technical kind of field like we are and so many other companies, right? Especially in this day and age, a lot of products are more technical in nature and require a service level component to them. And that requires more than just a transactional relationship, right? Of passing along a good for a price.
Yes. And how do you connect the customer classification with the customer process?
By customer class, you mean like type of customer that we have?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it differs depending on the industry that you're in, but creating types of customers, buckets that you can put your customers in that line up with whatever regulations you're dealing with is very important. So if you're dealing with defense industry, you're going to want to have military end users, maybe military intelligence end users, whether or not they're a full-on systems integrator or maybe they're a parts manufacturer. If you're in transportation, you're going to have automotive industry partners, you're going to have part suppliers, service providers. So you're going to want to create those buckets based on the industry that you're working in and the regulations that kind of apply to you. Fortunately, when it comes to defense and technical things, a lot of U.S. regulations have a prescribed set of buckets that are easier to follow. You can fall back on those. We tend to do that. But tailoring them to your industry or the industry that you're going to be working with is critical. Really helps speed up the process.
Yeah, of course. There has popped up a question in the live event in the comment box. How the risk level is generated in the Know Your Customer portal?
A couple different ways. And again, it depends on your program and what industry you're in. So location, where that customer is located, obviously can raise a risk level, right? Can raise your risk profile. If you're in the US and you're working with a NATO, EU partner, Australia, Japan, those kinds of folks, right? Your risk level is going to be a little lower. If you're working in some other country areas, right, your risk level is going to be a little elevated. And that just means that you need to do a bit more due diligence on that customer. By customer, that can also be suppliers and vendors, right? It's anybody, basically anybody you're talking to. But it happens either by location, industry, like we said before, right? If it's an MOD out of a country, your risk profile is going to be raised a little bit. Or if it's based on the kinds of items that you sell, right? It's maybe you got on your website, you've got a portal where you can ask a question or they can send in information about a product of yours and it happens to be the product covered in camouflage, then that might raise the risk profile, right? You need to do some more due diligence, or maybe it's the product that's pretty off the shelf that you can sell to a lot of folks. So those are the kind of factors that you use when you're developing the program for how you assess what kind of due diligence you need to do for that customer.
I think that was a great answer. Of course, having something camouflaged, of course, erases the need for the whole due diligence process, because then you're most likely dealing with sensitive equipment. If we're talking about know your customer and that process, what common red flags would you say you can bump into?
The main red flags would be transparency. The main one is if it's a customer that you've never worked with before, right? The willingness to provide the information is always one of your prime and kind of flags to look at, right? If they won't provide you any further information about who they are or what they do, they don't have, in this day and age, if they don't have some kind of web presence, they can be a bit of a red flag. There's not just a website, but there's also other kinds of social media, other kinds of portals that folks sell things on these days. Depending on the industry that you're in, having some kind of presence that you can verify and check is a big red flag, or can be, right? Looking at one of the main things that a US exporter, and I'm sure a European exporter probably should have, especially if you deal or manufacture with more controlled products, would be access to a watch list screening or a screening tool of some kind. A lot of providers out there have their own tools that have their own kind of algorithms and logic that can be tailored. Maybe they can be tailored to your industry. It checks the very specific lists, which are definite red flags. Those are black flags as opposed to red flags. If that comes
Yeah. It's a no-go flag.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's more than a stop, but you don't know unless you run that name.
Yeah, of course.
Or that kind of stuff. So having a piece of software that can do that for you. I know some jurisdictions have some free versions that are out there. The US has the consolidated screening list that's online. It's a bit more cumbersome than some of the software solutions that are out there. I've used several of them, and there's a lot of good ones out there.
Is the sam.gov still up and running? You know that?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
You can pick that one. The consolidated screening list is another tool. That one's a little easier to use if you're trying to look at US lists.
All right.
I'd recommend that one over the sam.gov, just for ease of a user interface perspective. Other red flags to look for if they're not even in an industry related to yours. Maybe you're in space vehicle manufacturer and you get a request from a agricultural farming equipment company. Probably deserves a little bit of a closer look to see what they're requesting and who they are, where they're requesting it. Not to say that's an automatic disqualifier, but something you should take a look at. Another really common one is if they ask for something that's just a bit outside of what they do. What I mean by that is something that's a little beyond the capability of something they might already have that may be on their website or something. That could be a flag that you take a look at. You want to investigate a little further.
Yeah, really look into the need for that specific product.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the lack of a web page. How big of a red flag would you say that lack of a web page is today?
It's the fastest way I think a lot of US exporters have to vet customer is taking a look at who they are, where they are. Are you saying what you're saying? At least we all know that we control our own web presence, but that's a fast way to take a look. It's not the only way. A lot of business nowadays is done through Gmails and other things, iCloud accounts, other kinds of providers. That can be a red flag, right? Depending on the industry that you're in. If you're in a less sensitive industry, that's perfectly reasonable that your customer is just a person who has their own personal email address. But if you're in a more sensitive industry, it might not be an accurate or an actual customer. It might be somebody who's trying to get something that they shouldn't have.
Yeah, of course. And something that I have bumped into is called enhanced due diligence, and the concept of that enhanced due diligence for high risk customers. Is it something that you could noodle into?
Yeah. Are you referring to having a third party or just extra questions? Because there's a couple different, I'll go through, there's a couple different ways, right? There are third party due diligence companies out there who can vet people for you, and they do that through questionnaires. You can hire them, you become members, or you can hire them to basically send a series of questionnaires over to that customer, have them fill it out. Gives your customer a bit of peace of mind that, hey, there's a third party here that's conducting this kind of due diligence. It's also has the benefit of if those customers participate in that more, they're part of this community that then has this information out there and helps speed up the vetting process for the next party. Or depending on where they're located, who they are, where they want the good sent, and what kind of good it is, you have your own questionnaire that you send. Every company should have, where it asks all the pertinent questions to the kind of thing that you're sending, that you're exporting, that you're making. Asking who they are, what they do with it, who their customer is, in a lot of circumstances, maybe who their financial institutions are that they use, things of that nature. So developing one on your own can be a bit time consuming, but in this industry, great artists steal. You can go grab one from another company and tweak it to make it fit your business. It's always a good place to start.
Yeah, and sometimes if you are, for example, doing due diligence on a customer, for example, that customer could actually trust the third party due diligence provider more than you as, what do you call it, as a supplier to them.
Yeah, it can add a layer of comfort to both parties that that third party's in there. So it can be very helpful in a lot of situations.
And now another question popped up in the live event from a mutual friend of ours, from no one less than Silas. Silas Waiters, he asks if the use of NDAs and end user certificates can be a key to adding a layer of protection. Could you elaborate on that one?
Sure. What we try to do is, if there is going to be an NDA put in place, that contract lets my department know, and we can ask for the end user statement at the same time. It's not always the same document, but it's good to have. And that copy of the NDA is probably going to come along with a program or a sales event in which somebody's going to have to provide them with a presentation, which means you're going to have to know what you're going to want to present on, right? So you need to have some visibility into what that is if you're going to be doing that. So that all has some end use information, know your customer level information in there. But to Silas's point, getting connected with your customer as a compliance professional, getting connected with your customer facing departments and asking how they do business, asking when they talk to customers, asking how they go and find them will help you tailor what you need to ask when. So don't be afraid to talk to the sales folks.
No, and I think you put your head on really important key questions in knowing your customer and learning who they are and what they do and why they need your products. And let's say that we have done a good due diligence process of a new customer and we have approved that one and we have ongoing deliveries to that customer. How would you say that you would recommend to work with ongoing monitoring, doing this continuous due diligence in the future to ensure that that customer didn't end up in another light, so to say?
Yeah. So great question. Oftentimes there's some contractual requirements. Certain changes are contractually required depending on your business you're in to be. Also, you're going to want to keep tabs on your customers' addresses and things for deliveries, right? So monitoring POs as they come in through your customer service department for an ongoing order, having a process in which any new addresses get run through a screening, right? Get 123 Main Street and all of a sudden they've moved across town. The new PO will have the new address records, gets put in your ERP or some kind of system or screened manually by a person, depending on how large of an operation you are. But changing any of those changes need to get screened. And then again, depending on your relationship and the product, an annual or bi-year or every other year certificate. Hey, we're still partners. We're still working together. Can you please fill this out? Make sure that you still sign up for all these restrictions. It mainly helps because I'm sure, especially in light of what's been happening in the past couple of years, things get added, different countries, export regimes add different qualifiers and markets that are under control or watch, or so you want to be up to speed on that, right? So anytime one of those changes happens, you want to, your next version of your end user certificate or statement needs to have that in there. So annual or biannual refreshing of that relationship is always great. Yeah, those are the key ways. So having your internal customer service folks or internal order processing folks follow a procedure for changes the main way.
And you mentioned doing a screening of there is different delivery addresses. Of course, you want to do a screening on that specific new address on the new PO, but how would you describe a customer that constantly changes the delivery address? Would that consider to be a red flag?
Depending on the product or the customer, is there, maybe you have a repair. Maybe you sell a lot of things that need repair or servicing. You got some in-country or third-party service center kind of organizations, right? Who buy your spare parts and replacement parts or something like that. They're probably not going to be at their address all the time. They might be at the customer's address. So if they do that, they need to have a good explanation in the request to satisfy those red flags. Why is every time you order something from me, it's going to a different place? Oh, because I'm traveling. We install this at these customers around the region. And of course, then now you have a whole new list of customers to screen.
Yeah, of course.
But that all really depends on what kind of business you're in and who that party is.
And another important question in trade compliance overall, but I'm sure that it's important also out of a know your customer perspective. But how would you say that, or how would you recommend how to integrate the know your customer training process into your regular training for your staff?
Great question. What I like to do is, if you're a U.S. exporter and you probably have an annual training that a lot of your U.S. Employees need to take. But even if you're any other company, having some function-specific export training is really great. So working with the functional leads and sales to go in there with some scenarios, just like the ones that you presented here. Here's why you need to be aware of if there's a change in address, you need to let us know so that we can screen, or if it's a new customer for a new type of product, here's what how are you going to roll that out to market, and how can we help train your sales folks to get back to the right people that reduce risk for the company, but yet promote sales. The training is a really big way, but the best training would be scenario based, pulling some of these scenarios that you've experienced or that others in the industry have experienced that you talk to, or we have a drink and talk about some of these things. You learn some scenarios that you can use in your training, right? Change the names to protect the innocent, but use them as training tools to alert your other functions what to do if something were to happen, or new customers. And the other big list is being involved, being out there as a trade compliance person in the business, being pestering to be invited to meetings and things like that will get you a lot more information. So those are my two recommendations for getting early access.
Yeah, to always be curious.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
And when you're doing the due diligence or know your customer process, could you highlight the importance of protecting customer data during that process?
Yeah, that happens a bit, right? Customers want to know why you want to know this information, especially I've run into this quite a bit, right? Depending on your industry, you work with other customers who might also be competitors sometimes, and worried about on this particular program, if they divulge who the ultimate end user is and they'll program them, maybe you'll have some angle in on there. That's handled contractually, right? There's contractual requirements that prevent companies from poaching and stealing and things like that, businesses. The main thing is the transparency adds to the efficiency. So the faster and more complete that information comes to us, the faster we can deliver products, the faster we can provide service. And knowing that when we enter into those relationships, when the companies enter into those relationships, they're for mutual benefit, right? We sell products and you get to use your products to sell something else or to provide a service to your customer. I have yet to find anybody that cutthroat that it's an issue, but I do find a lot of foreign customers sometimes don't want to, some non-US customers don't want to divulge information. And I guess I'll take that back. A lot of US customers don't want to either. They just don't want that kind of information out there. But you got to decide your risk profile for your company and your products, or you got to, how much information do you need to make sure that you're covered?
Sign a non-disclosure agreement to ease up that will to disclose information, perhaps?
I find that's already in a lot of businesses where you're program driven as opposed to PO driven, that the NDA in place has already been, it is either already in place or it's something that's been mutually agreed to. It just maybe hasn't made its way to the trade compliance folks. It's in the contracts department. If there is an NDA in place, you can just say, hey, we've got an NDA. We're bound by that and we'll honor it.
You can trust us. And what would you say is the biggest challenges in the Know Your Customer process?
You hit the nail on the head with that one. It's getting the information a lot of the time is the big challenge for all those reasons. Sometimes customers don't want to tell you. Sometimes they don't know. Depending on the product you sell, you might, if you sell water meters, residential water meters, and you need a product that I maybe manufactured, you're not going to know who's going to buy your meter. But then again, that's probably not a very high risk transaction. So might not need to know every house that it's going into. If I sell tracking software that can be used to track people, that's a different story. Mm-hmm. So it really depends, but building that trust with your customer to get the information is key. And then getting the right information to make a finer point, knowing, depending on what kind of business you're in and knowing how much information you need instead of just asking for it all the time can really help speed up the process from the exporter perspective. Maybe I don't need all the addresses for these uncontrolled or non-list items to places in a lot of the world, as opposed to for these more controlled items, I need to know a lot more information.
No, that makes perfectly sense. And what could you give away as some best practices?
Yeah, tailoring your end use process is a good one. Knowing your products. You might work for a company that has a really big portfolio of a lot of different kind of products. They all might have very different end use and knowing your customer requirements for building an effective program. One size might not fit all. Use other companies' forms and processes to help guide your own. If you're in a similar business with a similar company, even if they're not in the same country, but they're in the same market, right? That's a pretty good indication. That's something you should probably take a look at using if they've got something that you don't have on the form. The being invited or participating in frequent visits with your sales folks, always a great place to get a lot of scoop on where's next on the list. On the other side of that, your engineering teams or product development teams, knowing what's coming down the pipe, maybe getting a bit of a jump start on this is a really cool new product that you might have some level of control, and knowing that helps you when you get to the introduction section of the product development roadmap and saying, yeah, this is a great new product. Here's where we will require a lot of extra work. Maybe we have a pool of already existing customers that we already know and do a lot of business with. So that's great. But this new pool of customers, we're going to need end-use statements or vetting of some kind. And you only know that if you know that kind of product. So being involved in those two areas or having folks on your team involved in those two areas are really great ways of making sure it's not a surprise to you.
If you have this really new cool product, you really got to be careful who you sell them to, because they might be having some back-end thoughts with your products or reverse engineering or selling it to sanction parties and so on.
Yeah, I think what's happened recently and we've seen in the trade compliance world, seeing the articles about people trying to evade sanction parties trying to get their hands on things that they would otherwise be prohibited from getting. There was recent articles about certain countries have had their imports tick up in the almost 1,000% range from a year or two ago, which is a pretty good indicator that they're transshipping items. So knowing your customer in those kinds of regions, very critical. Back to the types of customers, another very important relationship to have is if you have distributors and resellers as your sales chain or as a mechanism for selling your product, educating them on the requirements of the jurisdiction that you're in. For me, it's the US, partnering with distributors and resellers who already know the US rules and maybe have other US customers is big, very helpful, because that they're focused on compliance and making sure that their end customers are compliant. Partnering with your distributors and resellers is another great tool to making sure that you stay compliant and that the stuff that your items don't end up in the wrong places.
Yeah, because in the light of everything that's happened the last couple of years, or 1.5 at least, there has been a ton of new sanctions. And of course, when it's new sanctions, there is also new ways of conducting sanctions evasions. This know your customer process may actually be a good also sanctions evasions process, or mitigating the sanctions evasions.
Yeah, I think a lot more companies in the US have become aware of their responsibilities and possible compliance liabilities that they might have because of the events that have been going on and the changes in the sanctions rules and sanction parties, right? Knowing how I think gone are the days of I sell it to a distributor and I don't know what they do with it, right? That's not going to satisfy a lot of regulators, and it's probably not going to satisfy public, depending on what you sell. The public might have an opinion about how you conduct that kind of thing.
Another comment in the live event: getting in with the contracts departments also helps, as the customer may have included clauses that require attention. Comment on that one?
Yes, contracts department is also great. All your internal departments, it really depends on how the business operates as to who's doing that. In the more programmatic defense world, you're going to have a contracts department, and absolutely right, there's going to be some stuff in there. If you're in the more PO driven world, it's might be at your T's and T's and C's on the PO, right? There might be some fun there, that some clauses on there you need to pay attention to. Knowing, I think that brings up a good point, is knowing how your customers order your product is a very good, asking yourself that as a trade compliance professional, hey, if I were going to order one of these satellite telemetry ground stations, how would I go about doing that? They'll walk you through, right? Have your sales guys walk you through what it takes to do it, right? I'm not in the market for anyone. Somebody might be.
Yeah, add to shopping cart.
Yeah, I'm waiting for it.
And the whole CP internal compliance program and risk assessment and risk mitigating, how big would you say know your customer and due diligence is for that whole ICP?
Oh, it's from knowing what your product is and what its class export rating is, depending on the country you're in. and knowing your customer are the two main things you need to know. So you can't really build a compliance program while also having only one of those. You could, but it probably would not be a sufficient program from a regulator perspective. That's one of the main things that you're going to get asked. And if you have a big enough program, having an external audit periodically coming in and poking those holes and asking those kinds of questions is always a great enhancement to any program, right? It's well worth the money to hire an expert to come in and figure out something that maybe you didn't think of, or maybe has some other industry best practices that you're just not aware.
Yeah, of course. Second opinions is always helpful and important.
Absolutely.
We have touched on this subject, but how can due diligence help identify red flags and prevent potential violations?
One, the basic screening, right? If it's in a spot where you're not allowed to send something to, they're here. You prevented the violation right there. Looking for extended capabilities the customer might not have or have a need for. We're going to violation. Part of that, knowing your customer, knowing your products means that you then determine what kind of authorization you need. So not having that information might lead you to exporting without a license when you needed a license. An exception may not be applicable depending on what's on there. If you're in the United States, or maybe an OGEL or something, if you're in UK or somewhere else in Europe, or another general license kind of regime area. So it's very critical to having a completed one as part of your standard work when you're reviewing things that are leaving the country. Is just, I think, another important thing to bring up is that as we've been talking a lot about product, physical things, having all this information. If you're working with another company to design something, you need to know what you're designing it for, to see if maybe that design or that technology is somehow controlled from your jurisdiction. This is not only applicable to the tangibles things, but to the intangible, the technology, the manufacturing, all that. You need to know what you're designing that product for. Kind of goes back to your point about maybe they don't want to give you all of the information about the program. Maybe they don't want it out in the open. Maybe they don't want it out and about, or maybe maybe the end customer doesn't want a lot of folks to know. But that's going to have an impact on how you rate that technology. Can your engineering department use that technology for other things to further other products or not? So you and your contract team in sales really need to work in lockstep in those kinds of situations to make sure you've got appropriate controls around the technology aspect and the interchange between the two companies.
That's a real great point.
5 companies, as it happens to be a lot of the times, right? It's not just 2 companies working together anymore. There's a lot of us.
I actually am all out of bullets in my sheet notes. Do you have anything other that pops up in the back of your head?
No, the main one that I wanted to bring up was the technology part. Just because it's not physical in your hand doesn't mean we don't need to do any due diligence on the customer and stuff. So it's very important. I also think it's really important that as trade compliance professionals, we reach out to each other at the companies. I'm on LinkedIn, so if your customer need help, happy to help.
That was going to be my next question. If people want to connect with you, how do they do?
Yeah, LinkedIn, I think, is the thing that everybody does now. So you can connect with me on there, and I'm happy to help where it's needed.
Awesome. And I really want to return to what you said about the intangibles. I think that's almost at least double as important to have in the back of your head, that your physical products, they may be hand carried, but they can also be contained for example, in a locked up storage area or something like that. But if you have your intangibles, your technology, your drawings, and so on, having those in a computer system or distributing them online in some way, emails or something like that. Those technologies can actually be airborne, and your control, you really have to have these measures of control to contain your technologies, because intangibles can be spread in a whole nother way than physical products. So you really put your head on a really important thing there.
Yeah. And not only from a trade or compliance or export perspective, you got intellectual property and know-how, secret sauce kind of concerns there that you also want to, that you're taking into account with that. It's easy to, if it's not physical, it's easy to forget about it sometimes, but it's the hardest part.
Yeah, I really think so. So I guess it's only thing left for me is to give you a warm thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And I think that this has been a ton of fun and a really valuable information-packed talk. So thank you once again. Awesome to have you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I think this was a great podcast, great format. I'm looking forward to see what else you get and participating even more.
Sounds good. Thank you once again. And of course, I love to have you in a future podcast as well.
Love to be here.